Well, ding, ding, ding. That is my makeshift bell. I apologize, but good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm Maria Schell, President-elect nominee of your Rotary Club of Portland, and welcome to our live weekly membership meeting. As many of you were chatting previously about the power outage, our President Ruth is stuck in that, as well as our past President Kate Ertman out on the coast has no power either. So here I am going to be leading our meeting today, and we are going to start right away with our reflection. So let's welcome past President Rotarian Deb Dion for today's reflection.
Thursday will be 7 months for me working at home. And as for all of us, it's been a real challenge in many ways. For some, much more so than others. And I look at the people in this meeting and we're all working or chiming in from home. We're among the more fortunate out there. I just want to say that I think these Rotary meetings and the meetings AJ is having on Thursday afternoons are one way to continue a normal life to the extent that it can be, and a great way to stay connected among our members. So it's going to be a while before things get back to whatever was before normal before. Everyone just keep on keeping on and stay involved in Rotary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev. I love that. Keep on keeping on. Now I'd like to welcome any of our virtual guests. Thank you so much for tuning in to our weekly meeting. If you could introduce yourself to all of us in the chat box, there's also a link in there for you to sign up and register yourself as a guest, and we're eager to stay in touch with you. Thank you so much today for joining us. And it is September, which means we're going to share with a happy anniversary to all of you who joined the Rotary Club of Portland in September. And as you know, we alternate between anniversaries and birthdays. So I think Siobhan will show here on the screen those who are having anniversaries this month. Wonderful. And I see Bobby Engling is on today. So congrats, 30 plus years in your anniversary. So wonderful to see that. And now we are actually going to all move into our virtual table talks. So in a few minutes, you are all going to disappear into your breakout rooms with a few other Rotarians. These will be selected at random. So if you don't know each other, please start by introducing yourselves. As you know, you'll also be getting a little note about 60 seconds before the breakout rooms will close, and you will all be brought right back here into our big room. And I know we always tell you that you will not run out of things to talk about, but in honor of our speaker for today, my suggestion would be if you could share with your fellow Rotarians your favorite podcast that you've been listening to. I don't know about many of you, but that used to be what I did on my drive and commute, which has now gone to 0. So I'm not getting as many podcasts in as normal, but I do have a nice queue ready to go when I make my future trips to Corvallis. So next, I would like to do that. So let's see, Corinne, can you send us all out to our breakout rooms, and we will see you back in a few moments. So now welcome Rotarian Nihad to announce this year's golf tournament. Nihad.
Hi everyone, it's me again, and this is the last time you will hear me for the month of September. Our event is coming up on Thursday. We need approximately six more players. So if you are interested, please let me know. You don't have to be a good player. You just have to be there. It's going to be fun. It's at Langdon Farm. Tea time is about 1:30. And we are going to give you lunch and some little tchotchkes, and hopefully you'll join us. The price is $125, and it is at Langdon Farms again. Hope you can make it. I'm only looking for 6 more players. Back to you.
Thank you, Nihad. And now for a bad piece of news to share on a day like today, but it is with great sadness to announce the passing of Rotarian Tom Hendrickson. Tom was a very active member of our club for 24 years, serving on multiple committees, and joining in at most, if not all, of our Rotary social events. There are no plans yet for a service at this time, but if you please could take a moment to write a note to Tom's family by following the link that has just been put into the chat box. We'll be sure to get that information over to his family. And now I'd like to share in a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. And now for some happier news. You may have wondered, with President Ruth not here, why we skipped our Vice President, but that is because we have exciting news to share that Vice President Reed Miller and his wife Emily welcomed their first child into the world on September 3rd, Warren Alexander Miller. Oh, I feel like everybody should clap loud and send lots of love to Reed and the family. Baby and mom, everyone is doing very well, so they're happy and healthy. So now on to our program. And after our speaker is finished, and if you'd like to ask Mike a question, I will attempt to moderate the Q&A as well through the chat box. So please just use the opportunity to raise your little blue hand in Zoom, or just put a note into the chat box that you have a question for Mike. So now please welcome our chair of the day, Rotarian Will Nolan.
Okay, hello everybody, and thanks for showing up on a day like today. It's very blustery outside, and I appreciate everybody being here. I also very much want to thank Mike for stepping up at the last minute and agreeing to do this for us. We were without a speaker, and called him up and I said, Mike, we need you, and he answered the call very enthusiastically, and I really appreciate that. Today, he's going to be talking about the whys and hows to do podcasting for your business. And if, I'm relatively new to the podcasting world, started listening to it only about maybe 6 months ago. And so I'm very curious to hear if it's something that would work for my business, or if I should just keep my mouth closed and listen only mode. Mike is the CEO of Veracity, which is a hybrid PR firm that combines both traditional and online approaches for his clients. And he manages the online version of that, of the clients. And as well, he shares his advisory expertise with CMEX, which is SEM-PDX. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, Mike. I probably butchered that. I'm very sorry. He is a current board member of the Rotary Club Portland, as well as serving on the Oregon and Ethics in Business Committee. And his experience began as he was the marketing director for the Oregon Sports Authority, and as a director of the largest sporting event in Oregon. In 2005, it was the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. And prior to that, he was a vice president at another digital marketing agency. Mike is a Duck, having graduated from the U of O, and a Portland native. He and his wife have 2 middle school age children. So I don't know if like you, but today was the first day of classes for us. And it was, so. Anyway, without further ado, Mike Rosenberg, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Will. Yeah, it was, one of my kids started last week, but it was barely a start. And then one of the other ones started this week. And if you heard this, I think we said it right at the beginning. Yeah, I have power out at my house too, so that doesn't help with starting school either, but that's okay. I am going to, let's see, let me share my screen. Hopefully I can get on the right one. Present. All right, that's loading. And so I also preemptively, hopefully I've had actually still power surges where I am. near my house and it's reset. So hopefully that doesn't happen. If I say it out loud, it won't happen. So everybody will be ready for it. But Will, thanks for that introduction. So you learned a little bit about Veracity. Sort of the main things that we do there is traditional marketing, traditional public relations, thought leadership, content marketing, and SEO PR. And then PR Talk, which is our podcast, which is, I guess, the reason that I'm kind of qualified to give a talk on podcasting is we have a podcast. It's about PR and marketing. It's been around for about 3 years. We are approaching episode 100. So somebody said something, if you get past 6 or get past 10 or something like that, at least you're doing something right, or you're foolish and you just keep going. Not really sure. We are actually sponsored by PRSA Oregon, which is the Public Relations Society Oregon chapter. Actually, my wife is also my business partner, and she's the main host of the podcast. I am an occasional host, an occasional guest, oftentimes the back end person, making sure that everything's getting done, that I'll sort of talk about some of that stuff. So I always like to prepare people, tell them what they're going to get. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we started our podcast and sort of how that's evolved. Touch on maybe why you might want to start one, or maybe why you don't want to start one. Kind of go over pretty quickly the things that you need to get started. And then at the end, talk about how to market a podcast, because that's kind of on the business side of it. If you're going to have one, you should probably have one for a reason and help spread the word about it. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions. I am not timing this, Maria. So if I'm getting close, I can see on my screen, maybe give me the go, move forward kind of stuff. So, how we started our podcast, like I said, about 3 years ago, and it has changed a fair amount. We actually started it a bit on accident. In our industry, whether it's with employees or clients, we end up doing a lot of teaching. And we have a lot of documentation about this teaching, but we found ourselves saying the same things over and over again, whether it was to new hires or new clients, about what we do and why we do it. And so we thought, maybe we should just record this. And we decided that based on actually the employee who was getting a lot of this information at the time was kind of an audio guy. He was in a band. He did a lot of recordings, knew how to edit audio. And we said, you know what, let's just record this and turn it into a podcast. So the first couple episodes were basically that, us kind of teaching him different pieces of our business in that way. And then that quickly actually evolved to us interviewing the media. And the reason that we did that is we thought maybe we should just come from the source. So we have lots of media interviews, lots of folks that if you go look at it, like Suzanne Stevens, the Business Journal editor, Cassidy Quinn, who's a personality from KGW, Nigel Jaquist from Willamette Week, who is also our organ ethics presenter. And in fact, one of my favorites was, if anybody remembers, they're off the air now, but Mike and Amy, who were the morning personalities of a country station, a funny pair. We are Mike and Amy as well. So I actually got to co-host that one. That was fun to do. But so we went that direction. And then we also brought back in some of the just sort of teaching type thing. So providing content around PR and giving advice. So it's sort of evolved and continues to evolve. During COVID, we had some topics about crisis communications during COVID. During social unrest, we've had multicultural marketing and diversity, equity, and inclusion guests. So that's kind of one of the nice things, is you can sort of take it wherever you want it. In fact, one of the things that we did right when COVID started is instead of PR Talk, we took a break and did a thing called Fika Talk, where my wife and daughter talked about working from home, schooling from home, growing a business with kids at home, and that sort of thing. So you can get creative and sort of diverge. Even at least ours, I guess, is maybe semi-professional, since we're taking these diversions into doing other things. So that's kind of the brief history of PR Talk and where it has gone. So to kind of talk about why you might want to start a podcast, what Will mentioned, thinking about, is it something that maybe I want to do? Am I an expert? Well, I think that the first thing is to make sure that it's something that you're interested in. So that's kind of the where it came from us. As I said, it's sort of evolved, but there's a lot of people do things because they want to learn. The reasons for starting it or doing a podcast. So we use it as it's become an intentional networking tool. plus maybe new business. For us, as I mentioned, it has put us as a thought leader, and we've learned a lot doing it as well. So those are maybe some reasons why you may want to start a podcast. The next piece, maybe, is the things that you're going to need to get started. So this is kind of the bulk of the presentation. And at first I'm going to talk about kind of the technical pieces, the actual things you need, and then I'll kind of get into the marketing pieces of the things pieces for marketing. So the first thing you're going to have is hosting. And there's actually two types of hosting. The first place is, where are you going to send people to listen to your podcast? To get a little bit technical, so the way that we do it is we have it as a page or a section of our website. We could have it be standalone. So it's on veracityagency.com/podcast. It could be on prtalk.com or some iteration of that. So it's either, we use it as a part of our business. It could be standalone. The third option for where you sort of send people is the actual a podcast hosting partner. So for example, we started on SoundCloud. Now we're on a service called Libsyn. It's just where you hold the files. Most folks, unless they're a huge organization with big servers or maybe a website development company that really wants to host the files themselves, are going to use a third party for the actual audio files. But you want to think about where it is that you're going to send people. Like I said, I think that embedding it on your site or having your own website is the way to do it. I sort of equate it to, in the blogging world, it was sort of the fashion to use a blog spot or a blogger.com for your blog. But if you're doing that just like in podcasting, then you're driving people to somebody else's site. So you're building value for them instead of for yourself. So definitely, I would recommend for most folks to use a third-party host, but to make sure that you have them going to your website or one that you create a property of your own. So then the question is, who do you use for that hosting? And it's hosting and syndication, because as those of you who listen to podcasts, most of you probably aren't actually going to the site that the podcast is hosted on. Sometimes depending on where you access it, but you're probably using Apple's podcast feature or listening on something like SoundCloud or iHeartRadio or Spotify. So your host is where you go to host the files, and it just sends an RSS feed to all of those different places. So you upload it one time with all the various elements of it. I always, when I hear about stuff like this, I also start to think about cost. So I'll mention cost as we go through these. And then I'll send a link in the chat that has, I gave this presentation or a similar one recently, and basically I put all the information in a blog post, so you don't have to take notes or even remember stuff. I'll send that out so that you have it. But so as I mentioned, we use a thing called Libsyn. At our level, it's $20 a month. It's all based on kind of how many minutes you upload for the most part. It's based on how much storage you use. But that's going twice a month or every other week, half an hour to an hour per episode. And that, like I said, it sends it to your YouTube or to iTunes, Google Play, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so the next piece, I actually skipped ahead, but so then you have equipment. So you need a hosting, and then the other thing you need is equipment. You're going to need a microphone. I'm actually not using this, but this was our first microphone. It's called a Blue Yeti. I think it was $125. It was great, or is great, for solo, for folks who are doing podcasting on their own. It does have other settings, so you could use it a little bit more versatile for interviews. We've even used it and recorded and shared some events that we've been at, learning events. So you need that. We actually also have another piece of equipment that's called a digital recorder. So we started out interviewing in person. Most of the media folks were local. And then we actually even did a couple of road shows. In fact, I remember one time we went to Seattle and interviewed a few different people. And one of the interviewees, she wanted to interview in a coffee shop. And basically the audio wasn't usable because of the noise that's around. So that's another thing to think about if you're going to start it is we'll talk about what we're doing now in our world that's virtual, but you don't have to have like a soundproof room or anything like that, but you do need to figure out a good space for things. The next piece of equipment that I was going to mention is a digital recorder that has 6 different slots for microphones. So with that, then you can do one-on-one, and the people can actually hold it, and you get a better voice. So one of the keys to making a podcast easier to produce is to have individual audio tracks if you're having more than one person talk, because then if you need to turn up the volume or turn down the volume or clean up the audio, you can do that much easier for each person as opposed to doing it together and having to split them out. And then sort of another piece of equipment you want is headphones. You want to be able to hear what's getting recorded as opposed to what's sort of going on in the world, because there may or may not be things that are getting picked up. And then if you're having guests, kind of a pro tip is to ask them to use headphones as well for that same reason. And then the only other piece of software you have to have for audio is some sort of audio editing. We use a tool that's called Audacity. It's a free editing software, and you use that, and we've used a Sound Pro to help us get our ideal settings. And whenever we have some tough audio, we'll still send it to him. But with that, most of the time we can just use these certain settings and get our audio sounding good enough for us. That's one of the decisions I'll talk about, is how edited you want your podcast. And then finally, we started doing more virtual even before COVID happened, because we wanted to get to people outside of Portland, or also kind of put how much they need to commit, because traveling and doing that takes even more time. And there's I guess it's basically a website called Zencastr, where it's a free, again, voice over IP podcast recording software. And basically you just send a link to your guest. They click on that link. Ideally, they're using at least headphones with a microphone, and then it'll, again, 2 separate tracks, record those, and then send you those to download so that you can then put them into your podcast. So Zencastr is a great tool. We've also started using Zoom, like everyone else. When everybody got used to Zoom, we thought, why not add video to this? Just folks know how to use Zoom. You're on it now. One special tip that's in the link that I send is you want to have individual audio tracks again, so you can separate those out. And there's, I think the instructions I have in this podcast, or in the blog post, that says how to do that. It's pretty easy, but if you ever messed around with all the different settings in Zoom, there's quite a few of them. And then you'll need video editing software if you're going to do video, but most laptops and computers come with at least enough that what we just cut out the beginning and the end. We don't actually do any video editing within the podcast as well. So along with that, what you need is you're going to have to make a lot of decisions. As I mentioned, through our evolution, we've done some interviews, we've done some solo, we've done some co-host type things. Having an idea of what you're going to do, again, it can always change, but that's a good thing to know. What are you going to do? Are you going to have it in person when we're meeting with people more, or are you going to do it online, virtually? How produced is it going to be? As I mentioned, I would say ours is in the middle. We don't just record and put it out there, but we don't spend a ton of time and energy and money making it sound 100% professional. We have had some times where somebody has misspoke or said something maybe that they weren't supposed to. So we'll go in and edit things like that, but we don't pull out ums and ahs and anything like that. So that's kind of the main things that you want before starting. And then once you start having a podcast, there's some things that you're going to need for each episode. So these are sort of the technical elements. And again, depending on how produced it's going to be, you may or may not have all of these. And we've kind of run the gamut for you already. So you're probably going to want to have some sort of intro. If you listen to podcasts, you probably heard some music come in, and maybe a boilerplate where they talk about what the podcast is about. Maybe have a sponsor mention in there, maybe have some music. That's going to be the same every single time. You might have a custom intro. We started doing this in the beginning where we would recap, this is what this interview is about, here's who the guest is. We found that took too much time and energy for us, so instead we just introduced the guest as we go. You may break it up in the middle and have a sponsor read or a commercial or something like that. Again, those are things that would be different every time. And then at the end, you're probably going to have some sort of outro or a validation or a sponsor read that's going to be the same every time. One thing that you don't have to have, but I think you should have, there's no point in doing it without, in my opinion, is you're going to have some sort of write-up, whether that's a customized blog post that's written after the episode that has all of the highlights in it, or a transcript of some type of the podcast, but you want to have something. And the main reason you want to have something is assuming that you're doing this with some sort of marketing in mind, having that text content is vital for having people find it, not only as they search through podcasts, but as they use Google and do sort of a typical internet search. That's actually a big reason that a lot of people are starting podcasts. Within the last couple of years, Google has started indexing the content, whether it's text, for sure text, and then also starting to index the audio content and transcribing that for you. So I don't know if anybody has searched for something with podcast in it recently on Google, you'll start to see that actual podcasts show up, and you can just go ahead and start listening to them from your browser. A couple of pro tips before we move on. Other decisions you have to make is, and it may depend a lot on how produced you want it to be, but are you going to use an audio engineer or producer? Are you going to use someone to write it up for you? One last thing is, if you are going to start a podcast, you want to start with a few episodes already recorded. And the reason for that is, one, if somebody likes it, you want them to be able to listen to more than one episode. And the other one is Apple and the rest of the podcast services like you to start that for that same reason. They want to be able to, you'll get better featured at the beginning if you have a few episodes kind of in the bank already. So once you've got your podcast, you've kind of answered all of those questions. The next thing you need to do is there's a few different things you're going to need to do to market it. So for each episode, along with the audio that you're going to have, you're also going to, of course, you have a topic for each episode, and deciding on what that topic is and how it fits into what you're doing is very important. You're probably going to have an image. At least a boilerplate image for every episode, or if you're interviewing people or talking about different things, you may need a custom one for each episode. That may be, plugging in a headshot into a standard image, or it may be different for each time. And of course, you'll have to have a few different sizes of that for your podcasting platform, for your website, for social media, all of those sort of things. Of course, as I mentioned, you want to have a blog post or some sort of write-up on it. And then you're going to want to have some sort of promotion for it. So the potential of all this stuff is really to drive all of the marketing, and it has a lot of good SEO value. So in that link I send you, I've got a checklist for all the things that I think you can do when you share it. So it's not just, let the episode launch. Ideally, you're getting on a consistent basis. Stats show that listeners really like to know that, your podcast comes out, if it's every week at the same day on about the same time, and, because they listen to it on their way to work, or, while they're taking a walk, or whatever it is. So they're ready to go. You're also going to want to, if you're interviewing people, have a template of when it's going to, for your guests to have them share it. You're going to, have a sort of standard way that you're sharing it on social, whether it's through your company or personal places. Oftentimes people will have other people who are in and around the topic that they're talking about, influencers, to share it with and ask them to share. Sometimes you're even going to do some paid promotion, whether that's through social or other avenues, depending on what your goals are. It's great content for email marketing. We've even had a few folks, times, not necessarily for our podcast, but for other folks, where we're using it like it's a PR story, because you've got expertise and thought leadership that's really explaining a topic. So that can be really good. Maria, how am I doing on time?
You're doing great. You have about 5 more minutes if that works.
Okay, perfect. So one of the other pieces that is very important is kind of the reviews and ratings elements of it. That's what's going to help you show up when people are searching around your topic. So encouraging folks to do that, just kind of like you would do in any other review and ratings for your business, is very important. One of the things that we've found successful is asking our guests if they find value in it, to go in and do that. It's in their best interest as well, is another reason if you're thinking about whether to have guests or not. It's one of the things that's really been beneficial for us is we pitch our clients to be on podcasts. And having an idea of really everything it takes to produce it and to create one of our own, and the work that goes into it, has really helped us be able to understand where, when we're pitching them to be a guest, where that's coming from. So if maybe, you don't want to start by doing your own, I would say also starting out by putting yourself out there as a guest and sharing your expertise might be another way to sort of understand if it's something that's for you, and that it has the value. And just like any other marketing tool, you have to have goals, and ideally you're putting some key performance indicators or even ROI measurements based on those. Is it fulfilling? Is it driving new business? For us, we look at one of our questions when we have an inbound lead come in is, how did you hear about us? Or what made you reach out to Veracity? And that they heard our podcast or knew that we had a podcast was something that was very high in there. And it's also become a great recruiting tool for us because we're sharing that expertise and an archive of these topics. In fact, if we're, for example, pitching the Portland Business Journal, we could even still go back and listen to this episode where they lay out the exact way that they want to be pitched, including time of day, based on when they're printing and publishing the Business Journal. So you can have some value, and it can be an archive as well. So like any good marketer, I have to end with a pitch. As I mentioned, it's our podcast is PR Talk. It's probably not for everybody on the call because we do talk about PR and marketing for the most part. But if that is a topic that interests you, I encourage you to go look at it. Like I said, we've got lots of, we're almost to episode 100. So if there's any marketing that you're trying to do on your own or just want to learn about, there's probably an episode that might cover it, including a couple organ ethics, at least one, if not two organ ethics in business episodes where we talked about that. I interviewed Dick Clark in one of the earliest episodes talking about organ ethics in business. So that's kind of fun. You can go back and hear how bad we were in the beginning. So with that, I think that's everything I have to say. Hopefully we can open it up for questions. If you missed the checklist that I'll put in the chat here right now, you can email me and I'll be happy to send it to you.
Thank you, Mike, so very much. So if anybody has a question, please do use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or also just let me know in the chat. I'm going to start with my first it's a two-part question, Mike. But if I wanted to start doing a podcast for my business and I was thinking about a 30-minute podcast every other week, realistically, in a course of a month, how much time should I be thinking about dedicating to this? If I were thinking about it as like a contracting it out or something like that. I mean, in a month's time, how many hours are you spending doing podcasting?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And in fact, I am not even looking at your screen right now. I am refreshing myself, looking at the link that I just sent because that's actually in there. So for us, it's about 7.5 to 5.5 hours per episode. So you double that if you're going twice a month. Now, again, there's lots of factors that are going to decide whether that's more or less. And I think a lot of those have to do with the expertise that you're outsourcing to, right? So, because you have to, and it depends on, if you're doing a 30-minute and it's via Zoom and the actual recording itself only takes you 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, as opposed to meeting with someone in person where you've got travel time and it just takes a lot longer when you're meeting with somebody because you're probably talking more and, the other travel time back. So there's a lot of factors involved. And, if you're hiring an expert to do it, they're going to be able to edit the audio a lot faster. If you're, as I mentioned, writing a full blog post, that's going to take you a lot longer than if you're just doing a transcription or maybe paying for a good transcription. So, but yeah, in that link, I break it down to each of those little factors that are in there of what we've experienced.
Thank you. I always seem to underestimate. I'd be like, oh, it should take me just, an extra 30 minutes after I record it. But thank you for giving me a dose of reality. My second follow-up, and then I'm going to call on a person with an actual person from the audience with a question. But what is your most meaningful KPI or indicator that you and Amy are looking at when you're doing podcasts? So what is your best metric that is making you feel like this has been a success, or we're getting off the train tracks or veering, and what are we going to do next? Yeah,
so I would like to say that the reason I struggle a little bit with this on the actual, so there's two things that I would look at. One is, as I mentioned before, our biggest KPI for ultimately is new business and new talent. And so, but that's kind of, those are usually a little bit fuzzy because it isn't, we're not having people click directly from an episode or, oh yeah, we heard about you. The only, they may search for us after hearing an episode. And so part of that's our website that gets them to actually end up reaching out and filling out the form, or same with potential employees. So we ask that, and just sort of hearing that is the biggest one for us on kind of the fuzzy math side of like, we have a feeling that it's working well because people are saying that it is, and people are saying that they listen to it. The real is, the actual concrete ones is we have stats. One of the reasons I think I mentioned we started with SoundCloud and then we moved to this other hosting platform called Libsyn is they have better stats. Now, podcast stats are also still a little bit fuzzy though, because a lot of people listen on their device and they don't share their listener data on their device. So it has to do with downloads more than listens, but we do look at those are our KPIs, our downloads, the platforms where you can actually see listens, and then website traffic to the pages where we embed our player. As well as we also look at our social. So we share each episode typically 3 times on social, and then we'll look at the social engagement that we get from those to have an idea of, one is what's hitting within the specific episode, but then just kind of if it starts dropping off, we would think it's starting to get old.
No, thank you very much. And our next question is from our executive director, Corinne.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your presentation. Just curious if you have any experience or have any information on charging for podcasts. I know most podcasts are free and you just download them and listen and you get funding through sponsors and such, but do you know anything about paid content?
Yeah, I really don't. I feel like I have heard that it's, a model that people, oftentimes they'll use, kind of like a freemium model where there's maybe some of the content is free, and then you can then become a sponsor, or, become a member and then get access to episodes or, other podcasts that aren't free. So you're kind of using podcasting, driving folks to that. I know that, one of the other sort of reasons that other people will start a podcast is maybe they're doing some coaching or offering an education source where that's, you have a free version and then you kind of get into it further with some premium stuff, but it isn't something that we have specifically done, but they're out there.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Rotarian Dev Dion.
Mike, thank you. Great presentation, food for thought. How do you think about audience size? What do you and Amy think about as a good audience viewership, listenership for your podcast? And how does that vary for things that are very broad versus narrow?
Yeah, so I think you just kind of hit it on the head. Is it's going to be different for everything depending on who your target market is, your topic that you're talking about. Ours is fairly niche. It's for PR folks, PR and marketing folks. It's not a general public audience type podcast. So I think that's another thing that as you're thinking about starting one, you kind of have to figure out what your goals are going to be there. I think it's like lots of marketing exercises where, for some marketing campaigns, getting one qualified person, probably not one, but 10 qualified people is amazing. And for others, it's 10,000. For us, we're averaging, and interestingly, our stats have changed a lot during COVID. And they haven't changed the way that we would have expected them to. I thought a lot of people would be listening to more podcasts because we're doing, because we're not, maybe we have more time because we're not traveling, but I think that a lot of people listen to their podcasts when they travel, to and from work, or they go to the gym and do it. Our podcast numbers have actually suffered a bit during COVID. We were averaging, again, like I said, it's kind of hard to tell, but we were averaging about 800 people listening an episode, which we always thought was pretty good. There's some that have millions. So it really depends on what your target market is to be able to think if it's good or not. I think the biggest indicator is, are you increasing subscribers is key. When that stops, maybe it's time to rethink about what you're doing, or, find a way to take a divergent or something.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for your questions. So moving on for next week, we will be hearing from Brian Rogers, the Executive Director of the Oregon Arts Commission, on the current state of arts during the COVID-19 time. The meeting will once again be live via Zoom at noon on next Tuesday. And just a few thank yous. Thank you, Dev, for stepping up last minute to give today's reflection. And thank you, Nihad, for all of your work for this week's golf tournament. So hopefully everybody will join on Thursday. I know there's still some spots left. And once again, thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your thoughts on the podcasting world. I have a list from my breakout group also of a ton of new podcasts for me to try. So hopefully everybody also is thinking about new podcasts to listen to and potentially starting one themselves for their business. So thank you everybody for joining us today. The meeting is adjourned. Ding, ding, ding. There's my fake bell again.